The sky over Althor was a dull gray, heavy with the smoke of battle. The once thriving world had been reduced to a smoldering wasteland, its cities scarred by years of endless warfare. On the ground, the remnants of a once proud resistance movement, now huddled together in makeshift shelters, their morale shattered by the never-ending attacks from the alien empire. It seemed like the end was near for the planet's inhabitants, who had fought valiantly for years but were no match for the ruthless invaders. Captain Lucas Jameson, the leader of the human resistance on Althor, stood in the ruins of what had once been a busy marketplace. Around him, his soldiers were preparing for their final stand. He could hear the distant rumble of alien war machines, their massive armored figures moving closer with each passing minute. His soldiers were exhausted, their faces drawn and weary from the endless fighting. Many had lost family, friends, and comrades in the fight to protect their homes. Lucas himself had seen too many of his fellow soldiers fall, and each death weighed heavily on his shoulders. Lucas had never wanted to be a leader. He was a soldier, not a commander, and certainly not a symbol of hope for a planet on the brink of destruction. But when the previous leader of the resistance had died in battle, there had been no one left to take charge. Lucas had stepped up, not out of desire but out of necessity, and now it seemed like there was nothing more he could do. His people were losing the war, and there was no one left to save them. He walked among the soldiers, trying to offer encouragement, but the words felt hollow. He had promised them that they would fight until the end, but now, with the enemy forces closing in, Lucas wasn't sure if they would make it through another night. The thought of surrender had crossed his mind more than once, but he couldn't bring himself to utter the words. They had already lost too much. As Lucas walked through the camp, his mind was consumed with the weight of his decisions. He had ordered several raids against the alien forces, but each time they had been met with overwhelming retaliation. The aliens, with their superior technology and firepower, had quickly crushed their resistance. It was a losing battle, and Lucas knew it. But there was one thing he hadn't given up on: the plea for help. Earlier that day, Lucas had sent a message across the stars, a desperate cry for aid. It had been a long shot, but what else could he do? The message was simple, pleading for any help that could turn the tide of the war. It had been sent in every direction, hoping that someone, anyone, would respond. They needed more soldiers, more firepower, and more hope. They needed a miracle. The transmission had been sent to every major galactic faction they could think of. The humans had allies in other parts of the galaxy, but none of them had ever faced an enemy as powerful as the one currently ravaging Althor. Still, Lucas clung to the idea that someone might answer, that there might be a force out there strong enough to save them. But as the hours passed and the message went unanswered, his hope began to fade. The sound of approaching footsteps broke him from his thoughts. One of his officers, Lieutenant Maria Sanchez, approached with a worried look on her face. Her uniform was torn and dirtied, but her eyes were sharp and focused. "Captain, we've finished setting up the last of the barricades," Maria said. "But there's something you need to see." Lucas nodded and followed her to the makeshift command center. Inside, a group of resistance fighters were gathered around a holographic display, their faces tense as they watched the flashing lights of enemy forces closing in on their position. The situation was critical, but it wasn't the enemy they were focused on. "Sir, we've received a response," one of the technicians said, his voice shaky with disbelief. It's from another human faction. We weren't expecting this." Lucas stepped forward, his heart racing as he looked at the holographic screen. There, in the message log, was a single line of text. "We are the Deathworlders. We are coming." The words didn't make sense to Lucas at first. Deathworlders? He had heard the term before, but it had always been just a rumor, a story told around campfires to scare the younger recruits. The Deathworlders were legendary warriors from Earth, known throughout the galaxy for their brutal combat skills and unmatched resilience. They were feared by all, and their reputation for merciless efficiency was enough to make even the most powerful empires hesitate to cross them. "Are you sure this is real?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The technician nodded. "We've run the analysis. It's coming from a confirmed human military signature. They're really coming. Lucas couldn't believe it. For so long, he had assumed that help would never arrive, that they were truly alone. But now, a glimmer of hope had appeared. The Deathworlders were coming. He didn't know what it meant or why they had responded, but he knew that this was their last chance. "Prepare the soldiers," Lucas ordered, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. "We don't know what these Deathworlders are capable of, but they might be our only shot at survival." Maria nodded, her face a mixture of relief and confusion. "Yes, sir. I'll get the troops ready." As she left, Lucas stood alone in the command center, staring at the blinking message. His heart was pounding, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. He turned back to the map of the planet, the enemy forces closing in from all sides. The Deathworlders would arrive, soon. But would they be enough to save them? And at what cost? He didn't know the answers, but he couldn't afford to waste any more time. The survival of his people depended on the arrival of these mysterious warriors, and Lucas Jameson would do whatever it took to ensure they were ready. As night fell over Althor, the sky seemed to darken even further, the looming alien ships casting their shadows over the city. But for the first time in a long while, Lucas wasn't entirely afraid. The Deathworlders were coming, and that was all that mattered. The night stretched on, an eerie silence settling over Althor as the last rays of daylight vanished. In the distance, the enemy's ships were barely visible, moving slowly toward the planet. The people of Althor, tired from the day's battle, had taken shelter wherever they could, some hiding in the ruins of their homes, others inside fortified bunkers. Captain Lucas Jameson stood on the roof of a building, his eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting. The cold wind whipped through his hair, but it didn't bother him. His thoughts were elsewhere, on the message from the Deathworlders. Was it real? Would they truly come to their aid? The skepticism still lingered in his mind, but he refused to give in to it. They had no other option. The wind howled, and Lucas's mind returned to the battlefield. He had watched as his people fought bravely against the alien invaders, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The aliens had technology that was far beyond anything they could muster. The battle had been a long one, and for the first time, Lucas feared they might lose everything. His people had endured hardship, pain, and loss. But now there was hope, even if that hope came from an unknown source. His communicator buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Lieutenant Maria Sanchez again. Her voice crackled through the static, urgent and full of excitement. "Captain, they've arrived. The Deathworlders are here." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. He quickly sprinted down the stairs, his boots hitting the ground with urgency. Maria was waiting at the command center where a group of soldiers gathered around the holographic map, their faces lit with anticipation. "They've entered the atmosphere," Maria said, pointing to the screen where the Deathworlders' ships were now visible. They were different from the enemy's ships, larger, more imposing, and unmistakably human in design. The technology was more advanced than what Lucas had ever seen, with sleek, dark metal surfaces and glowing lines that pulsed with energy. Are they human?" Lucas asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Maria nodded. "Yes, Captain. They're human. But there's something different about them. These ships, these warriors, they're not like us." Lucas stared at the screen. His thoughts raced. What kind of humans would send such a powerful force to help? What kind of people were the Deathworlders? "They're descending," another technician said, his voice trembling with awe. "I've never seen anything like this." The screen showed the ships descending toward the planet's surface. The air shimmered with the heat from their engines as they broke through the atmosphere, their movement slow but deliberate. The sound of engines roaring in the distance signaled their arrival. The soldiers gathered around the map were on edge, watching in stunned silence. As the ships landed, a strange hush fell over the camp. It was a moment of uncertain hope, the air thick with anticipation. The entire city seemed to hold its breath. Lucas stepped forward. "Prepare the troops," he ordered. "We need to meet them. We don't know what they'll be like, but we need to make sure they know who we are and what we're fighting for." Maria nodded, signaling to the soldiers to get ready. Within minutes, a small group of resistance fighters, led by Lucas, moved toward the landing zone. The Deathworlders' ships were positioned in a large circle, their hulking shapes casting long shadows across the ground. When they arrived at the landing zone, the sight before them was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The Deathworlders stood, tall, dressed in dark, armored suits that seemed to reflect the harsh environment around. The sun rose over Althor's broken landscape, casting long shadows over the debris-strewn battlefield. The night had been long and brutal, but the enemy had been defeated. The Deathworlders had struck with deadly precision, crushing the Zorath forces that had once seemed unstoppable. Their victory was complete, but as the first light of day illuminated the ruined city, Lucas Jameson couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in his chest. Standing at the edge of the battlefield, he watched as the Deathworlders moved, and gathering the remnants of their fallen enemies. The once proud Zorath army lay in pieces, broken ships, scattered bodies, and wreckage of technology unlike anything the people of Althor had ever seen. The Deathworlders, efficient as always, worked quickly and silently, their armored forms moving like shadows through the chaos. But Lucas wasn't sure he was seeing a victory. He had watched the Deathworlders in action, and while their power was undeniable, so was the ruthlessness with which they fought. There had been no mercy, no prisoners taken. Every alien soldier had been killed, their ships reduced to nothing but burning ruins. The Zorath forces had been wiped out in a way that left no trace of resistance. He had been grateful for their help, of course. His people were alive today because of the Deathworlders' intervention. But at what cost? The method of warfare they used was brutal and final, leaving nothing but ashes behind. There had been no talk of justice or mercy, only the cold certainty of war. Lucas could hear the voices of his fellow soldiers behind him. They were speaking in hushed tones, unsure of what to make of the situation. Some were grateful for the Deathworlders' intervention, others uneasy about what the future might hold. The commander of the Deathworlders, Zane, had made it clear that their help came with conditions. They had saved Althor, but Lucas had learned that they expected something in return. As the morning wore on, Lucas met with Zane in the heart of the city, near the command center. The Deathworlders had set up a temporary base there, their technology already beginning to improve the city's infrastructure. Drones buzzed overhead, scanning the area for any remaining threats, while Deathworlders worked alongside the Althorian resistance to rebuild what had been destroyed. The city was still a war zone, but there was a sense of progress even if it felt hollow. Zane stood near a group of his soldiers, observing the scene with a detached expression. He was a tall man, his face hard and weathered by years of battle. His eyes, though, were sharp, always watching, always calculating. Lucas could see the weight of his decisions in those eyes, and for the first time, he wondered if the Deathworlders truly cared about the people of Althor, or if they were simply here for their own reasons. "Captain Jameson," Zane said as Lucas approached, his voice as calm as ever. "Your people fought well. They held their ground." Lucas nodded, but the praise felt empty. "We didn't have much choice. You gave us the chance to survive." Zane didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced over at his soldiers, then back at Lucas. "You are welcome," he said, his tone still cold. "But this war is far from over. We did not come here simply to help you win one battle. We are here to ensure that the Zorath Empire does not return." "I understand," Lucas replied. "But the way you fought, it wasn't just about defeating them. You destroyed them completely. No one was spared." Zane's lips curled into a slight smile, but there was no warmth in it. "That is how we fight. The Zorath were a threat to your world, and we eliminated that threat. You would be wise to understand this. Death is part of war. It is the cost of victory." Lucas swallowed hard, his mind racing. He had seen it. He had witnessed the Deathworlders' efficiency, their absolute disregard for mercy. The Zorath had been a cruel enemy, no doubt, but something about the way the Deathworlders handled them felt wrong. It felt like there was more at stake than just the battle. There was a larger, unspoken purpose behind everything they did. We did what we had to do, Zane continued, sensing the unease in Lucas's voice. And now, we claim what is ours. Lucas frowned. What do you mean? Zane's gaze was steady, unwavering. We have fought for you. We have bled for you. Now you must give us what we are owed. This world is ours by right. Lucas's eyes widened. What do you mean, ours by right? This is our planet. You came here to help, not to take it over. Zane's expression remained unchanged. You misunderstand. We are here to ensure your survival. But we cannot leave without securing our position. The Deathworlders do not fight for others for free. We will help you rebuild, but we expect to establish a permanent presence on this world. Your planet will become part of our domain. Lucas felt his stomach tighten. He had been so focused on surviving the war that he hadn't thought about what the Deathworlders wanted beyond the fight. He had assumed they were simply offering help out of some sense of duty or honor. But now it was clear. They had their own agenda, and it wasn't about saving Althor. It was about taking control. You can't just take over our planet, Lucas said, his voice rising. We fought for our freedom, for our people. You can't just come in and demand control. Zane stepped closer, his towering figure casting a long shadow over Lucas. You have no choice. We saved you. We could have let the Zorath finish what they started, but we did not. We gave you a chance, but it comes with a price. If you want our protection, you must accept our terms. The Deathworlders do not negotiate. We take what we need and we leave the rest to you. Lucas felt a wave of anger rise within him, but he knew he couldn't fight Zane. Not now. Not with the Deathworlders' power so overwhelming. The city was in ruins, and his people were still recovering from the battle. They were vulnerable, and Zane knew it. What are you asking for? Lucas asked, his voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside him. We will establish bases on this planet, Zane said, his tone almost matter-of-fact. We will control the major cities, and we will have the right to govern them. In exchange, we will continue to protect you from external threats. We will rebuild your military and make sure you can defend yourselves. You will have peace, but only if you agree to our terms. Lucas was silent for a moment, the weight of Zane's words sinking in. He had never imagined this kind of deal. He had expected the Deathworlders to leave once the war was over, but instead, they were here to stay. And if they didn't accept, they would lose everything they had gained. What happens if we don't agree? Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zane's expression softened, just a fraction. You won't have to find out. We've already given you everything you need. The choice is yours, Captain. Accept our terms and you will have peace. Refuse and you will be at war again, this time against the Deathworlders themselves. The cue. Silence that followed was heavy. Lucas's mind was racing, but he knew what he had to do. He couldn't risk losing what little they had left. He had to protect his people, even if it meant sacrificing their freedom. I'll speak to the council, Lucas said, his voice tight. We'll discuss your terms. Zane nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Wise choice, Captain. You have until tomorrow to make your decision. But remember, once you choose, there is no turning back. As Zane walked away, Lucas stood there, alone in the midst of the ruins, his thoughts a whirlwind. He had won the battle. But at what cost? The Deathworlders had saved Althor, but they had taken more than just the enemy. They had taken control. And now Lucas had to decide what kind of future his people would have. A future under the rule of the Deathworlders, or a future without their protection, but with their freedom intact. The weight of that decision pressed down on him, and for the first time in a long time, Lucas wasn't sure which path to take. The days that followed the Deathworlders' victory were filled with a tense stillness. The streets of Althor's capital were bustling with activity, as the resistance fighters and the Deathworlders worked side by side to clear the wreckage, rebuild the city's infrastructure, and prepare for any future threats. Yet beneath the surface of this hurried activity, there was an undeniable sense of unease. Captain Lucas Jameson stood at the edge of the city, overlooking the construction crews working to restore the buildings. The sound of heavy machinery filled the air, but Lucas's thoughts were elsewhere. The Deathworlders had brought with them the tools to rebuild, advanced technology that could fix broken structures, purify water, and generate power. But all of it came with a price. Lucas had been meeting with the council every day since Zane's ultimatum, discussing the terms the Deathworlders had set. They had agreed to the deal for the time being. But the council was divided, and the weight of their decision sat heavily on Lucas's shoulders. Some of them believed that it was the only way to ensure the planet's survival. Others, like him, wondered if they had just traded one kind of oppression for another. Zane had been true to his word. The Deathworlders had established their bases in the major cities, their soldiers patrolling the streets and their ships hovering in the sky like a constant reminder of their presence. The Zorath had been defeated, yes, but in their place stood another kind of power, one that Lucas was not sure his people could trust. As the days passed, tensions began to rise. While the Deathworlders worked tirelessly to rebuild, they also began to impose their control on the planet. Their soldiers enforced curfews, monitored communications, and maintained. The days after the council meeting passed in a blur. The air around Althor's capital was thick with uncertainty. The city was slowly rebuilding, and the Deathworlders were continuing their work, improving the infrastructure, providing medical supplies, and setting up defensive positions. But despite the outward signs of progress, there was a growing unease among the people. Captain Lucas Jameson had never felt more conflicted. The Deathworlders had saved his people from the Zorath Empire, yes. They had brought an end to the invasion. But now, as their influence grew stronger, it became harder to ignore the price they were paying for that protection. Lucas knew that the council would have to make a decision soon. The Deathworlders had been patient, but that patience was starting to run out. The looming threat of further resistance was always present, and they weren't willing to stay in the background much longer. They wanted control, and they were not afraid to take it. Lucas had spent the past few days visiting different districts of the city, talking to the people. The resistance fighters were more relaxed now, but they still felt the sting of the Deathworlders' presence. The civilians, on the other hand, were growing more anxious. Their once familiar lives had been turned upside down. Every corner of the city was under surveillance, and rumors spread about the Deathworlders' methods, how they crushed any sign of disobedience, how they treated the people with an indifference that seemed cold and unforgiving. One morning, Lucas received an urgent message from Zane. The message was clear. A final meeting would take place to discuss the future of Althor. Zane was willing to make a deal, but it would come with strict conditions. Lucas stood at the edge of the city's central square, watching as the Deathworlders continued their work. There was no denying their efficiency, but efficiency didn't make the people of Althor feel safe. It made them feel controlled. Lucas couldn't shake the nagging feeling that, in accepting their help, they had sold their future for temporary peace. A heavy sigh escaped him as he turned and made his way toward the central command center. As he walked through the streets, he couldn't help but notice how things had changed. The once thriving marketplaces were now quiet, with only a few traders daring to set up their stalls. The lively chatter that had once filled the streets was replaced with a constant murmur of worried voices. People were still trying to adapt, but they were also growing more suspicious of the Deathworlders' presence. When Lucas arrived at the command center, he found Zane already waiting. The large room was filled with maps and holographic screens displaying the various operations underway. There were no pleasantries, no small talk. Zane's face was as unreadable as ever. "Captain Jameson," Zane said, his voice steady, "I trust your people have had time to think about our offer." Lucas nodded, trying to keep his emotions in check. He had been thinking about little else for days. The future of his planet was at stake, and the weight of that decision was pressing down on him. "I've spoken to the council," Lucas replied, his voice firm but tired. "We're ready to discuss the terms, but I need to know exactly what it is you're asking for." Zane's gaze softened ever so slightly. You've seen the way we operate. We protect, we control, and we keep the peace. But to ensure the continued safety of Althor, we must have full authority over its defense. That means we will control the military, the resources, and the strategic positions. The people will be free to live as they wish as long as they follow our guidelines. We're not asking for everything, just the necessary measures to ensure your survival. Lucas clenched his fists, trying to hold his anger in check. Survival? He repeated. You want us to hand over everything to you. Our freedom, our military, our resources, all of it under your control. How is that survival? That sounds more like surrender. Zane remained calm, his voice unshaken. You have no choice, Captain. Without us, your world would fall. You've seen the way we fought. You've seen how we destroyed the Zorath. There is no negotiation here. Only survival. Lucas was silent for a moment. He knew Zane was right in one way. Without the Deathworlders, Althor would be defenseless, but at what cost? How long could they remain under the control of another power, even if that power had saved them? We agreed to your help, Lucas said, his voice tight. But we never agreed to lose our independence. Zane's expression shifted slightly, the faintest hint of a smile crossing his face. And yet, you've already given it up. You just don't realize it yet. Your people will live, but they will live under the safety of the Deathworlders. That is the price of peace. Lucas felt a surge of frustration. It was clear that Zane wasn't interested in compromise. He wasn't offering a partnership, he was offering domination. We need time, Lucas said, taking a step back. We need to discuss this further with the Council. There's more at stake here than just survival. You're asking us to give up everything for peace, but peace doesn't come with control, it doesn't come with oppression. Zane studied him for a moment, then nodded. Very well. You have your time, Captain, but understand this. The longer you wait, the less control you will have. We're here to protect you, but we're not here to wait around forever. Make your decision, and make it soon. With that, Zane turned and left the command center, leaving Lucas standing alone, the weight of the decision heavier than ever. What could they do? The Deathworlders were not the kind of force that could be bargained with. They didn't offer freedom. They offered protection, but only if it was on their terms. Lucas walked out of the command center and into the streets. The tension in the air was almost suffocating now. People were whispering about the Deathworlders' demands, and there was a growing sense of dread in the city. No one knew what would happen next. But everyone felt the heavy hand of the Deathworlders' control slowly tightening. He found his way to the council building, where the members were already gathering. As he entered the room, the familiar faces of the council members looked up at him. Some looked hopeful, others uncertain. We've had time to think, Elda said, her voice tired. But the decision is harder than we thought. The Deathworlders have made it clear they will not back down. They want control over everything, our resources, our military, and our future. And we have no choice, Talon added, his voice heavy. Without them, we are nothing. The Zorath could come back, or worse, someone else could take advantage of our weakness. But at what cost? Lucas asked, his voice sharp. What happens to our independence? To our freedom? They are not here as friends. They are here as conquerors. They want control of this planet, and they'll take it whether we agree or not. The room fell silent as the council members exchanged worried looks. Lucas could see the fear in their eyes. They didn't want to be ruled by the Deathworlders, but they didn't want to lose everything either. We can't afford to wait, Lucas said, his voice rising. We're already under their control in everything but name. If we don't act now, we'll be lost forever. We have to find another way. What other way is there? Elda asked quietly. We can't fight them, Lucas. We don't have the strength. Lucas turned and looked at the map of Althor, the land that he had fought to protect. He thought about his people, their hopes, their dreams, their future. I don't know what the answer is, Lucas said finally. But I won't let this planet become just another world under the thumb of a powerful empire. We can't give up everything. We can't let the Deathworlders take over completely. There has to be another way. Elda nodded, her expression thoughtful. Then we will find that way, Captain. But time is running out. As the council meeting ended, Lucas left the room with a heavy heart. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. Althor would never be the same. The Deathworlders had come, and they had changed everything. The question was whether they could find a way to keep their planet and their freedom intact. Althor's sky, once a symbol of hope and freedom, now seemed heavy with the weight of the planet's future. The Deathworlders had done what they promised. They had defeated the Zorath Empire, they had crushed the invaders, and they had provided the protection Althor's people so desperately needed. But now, as Lucas Jameson stood on the balcony of Go, the newly rebuilt command center, he couldn't shake the feeling that the price for that protection was too high. Lucas gazed out at the bustling city below. The streets, once filled with the sounds of vendors and laughter, were now quieter, with soldiers patrolling the roads and drones hovering overhead. The Deathworlders had established their bases in key cities, controlling the defense and military operations. The people of Althor, while grateful for the safety, had begun to realize that their independence was slipping away. The council had met several times in the past week to discuss the terms laid out by the Deathworlders. The decision had been clear in the end. The people of Althor would accept the Deathworlders' terms. The Deathworlders would control the military, manage the planet's defense, and establish their own bases. But the people of Althor would remain free to live their lives as they wished, as long as they adhered to the rules set by their new protectors. The agreement had been signed that very morning. The Deathworlders would remain on Althor, their presence permanent. In return, they would guarantee peace and security for the planet. It was the price of survival. But now, as Lucas reflected on the deal, he couldn't help